Hello and welcome to the I Create Daily podcast. I'm LeAura Alderson.
And I'm Devani Alderson. We are the mother-daughter co-founders of the I Create Daily brand.
We are passionate about encouraging positivity, creativity, and productivity while bringing you information and resources that support your creative aspirations.
I Create Daily is for creators in every genre of creating, from musicians to writers, crafters to inventors, bloggers to entrepreneurs. So if you're into creating anything, this podcast has something for you.
So tell us, what would support you most in your journey? You can reach us at creators@icreatedaily.com.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of the I Create Daily podcast. I'm Devani.
And I'm LeAura.
And today's coffee break, we are going to be talking about overcoming fear and negativity.
Yeah, and this is catalyzed by the observation that so many people share and a concern for where the things are going in the world and for the negativity in the media and negativity on social media. We manage several social media groups. That's one of the things that Devani does for her clients. And we see so much inflammation essentially in the body of humanity relative to people getting upset so easily and so quickly over things that really that don't matter or are irrelevant in the big picture, or even if it seems relevant, that there's a lot of time spent arguing and fearing and being negative about the things that we can't change. So there are a number of things that catalyzed our wanting to do this episode. And we're going to go through some of those because fear and negativity will not help us achieve our dreams. When I say us, I mean the collective us, to include any of you in our audience, any creators seeking to do more of your work in the world, whatever is your creative endeavor. And whether or not that's for business or a hobby or something that's an avid interest. So if we get to the end of this life, looking back, we are not, or when we get to the end of this life, as we all will, hopefully many years from now, looking back, reflecting, we won't be really spending any time reflecting on all the time we spent caught up in negative news, in the gossip columns, or what happened to this or that character, or whatever the current headline of the day might be. So there was one this morning about I don't even remember the exact one, and I don't even want to get off in the tangent. We've talked about that before relative to the Alexa headlines.
Oh yeah,
we have an Alexa device, and the headlines that flash through. I don't tune into the news or pay attention to the clickbait things whenever I go to visit websites, because they inevitably derail me from my purpose in my day. And that's out there to grab our attention. It's in our cellular biology to want to know what's up, because that was our survival eons ago. It's still in our cellular biology to pay attention to shock value. And that reminds me of when some years ago, like maybe even 9-10 years ago, and we were getting one of our products out at that time was a fitness product, and we went through, our recording just blipped. Do you think I think we're still on.
I think we're good.
Okay. We lost, we thought we were going to switch to what I was saying. I meant to say that we were trying to promote a fitness product, and we were learning all about marketing and media and connecting with PR companies and firms, etc. We were going to advertise in a PR publication, and the program that we bought into for coaching included a free ad slot. A couple of free ad slots as a part of the package. When I got on the phone with the representative who was taking down my notes about our product so that they could help us create the ad, and they were the pros, what they said is, we need you, what's of shock value regarding your product? What will shock people about your product or about their concerns that your product addresses? We want to appeal to shock, fear, or there was one more,
Generally, it's like pleasure, but
usually it's
like
pleasure,
shock, fear,
or
or pleasure.
yeah.
But for fitness, it's probably like shock, fear, or just like immediate need for change.
Yeah, some kind of like pleasure would be an example of some kind of delicious food, delicious food image. There was not exactly the word they used, but anyway, it's the same concept. Yeah. So
just the immediacy and urgency of like, you need this, and if you don't have it, then you're missing out. It's the fear of missing out concept, the urgency of needing something in your life for it to be complete, as opposed to just accepting how things are and gradually making your changes as you need to.
Yeah, and I really had a hard time with helping them create that ad because I didn't want to do that. And just from the beginning, I didn't want, this is like 9 years or so ago, I didn't want to, I said, I don't want to shock them to making a change or whatever. And they were certain that and adamant that's the way you get people's attention. Well, we can still see that.
And you can, and then that might work. It does work, obviously. Obviously that works to get attention, but it's so flashing, it's so
flash in the pan kind of thing.
Flash in the pan, and which is why they constantly have to create more, because if it actually created lasting impact, you wouldn't have to shock people.
Lasting
constantly.
value. I mean, I get it because it's a noisy marketplace, and so in order to stand out and be found and heard, you have to first get people's attention. But that and marketing in general, those kinds of things in marketing has always rubbed me the wrong way, because that I don't respond to that and don't want to respond to that in my life. It's sort of like the concept of not starting your morning with email and the inbox of someone else's agenda, because usually the emails in your inbox that is this or that person or this or that sales thing wanting you to do something or offer you something, whatever, isn't a part of your purpose for the day. We don't usually start our day saying my purpose is going to be to read email and see what I need to do for the day.
Right.
So we really want to, it's all about, for us with I Create Daily, it's about the intention of creating the day we want and to create beauty and positivity in the world is a big part of that for us. If you've read any of our articles, tuned into any of our podcasts before, then you are already familiar with that. And it is so important. And it's really distressing that there are so many people who are so caught up in so much of the fear and concern about the world. This isn't a political episode. We never do that. It's not religious. It's not about what you should and shouldn't do. It's about something and a thought and perspective to consider that is a part of what we use and incorporate that really helps and works. And so for a time, I did get caught up in the fear of the day and what have you. And then I started noticing, and this actually cuts away to when we went to India, when Devani was born, in fact. So I've been to India 3 times, and the second time I was in India, we were there for 5 weeks, and that's when Devani was born in 1995. We were caring for her the first 5 weeks of her life before we adopted her, which took 3 years, and that story we've shared elsewhere. But then the next time we went was 3 years later, again there for 5.5 weeks to try and bring her, 3 months actually, the first and the second and third time, but to finally bring her home. And it took us 3 months to get her home. So then we were there each time, those second and third trips, we were there for about 3 months at a time. What I know, and that was like, 1995. So the TV that was available when we saw TV, very little, if any of it, was in English. Occasionally you could get a BBC channel. And so really we didn't have much to tune into and watch news-wise, unless we were watching something in Hindi. What I noticed when we came back home and started turning on the TV again, so this is like about 3 months without a lot of world news, really without a lot of world news. And about 3 months later, we come back, when I notices that the talking heads still all sounded about the same. And now, 20 years later, 25 years later, they still all sound about the same.
Just maybe more shouting and maybe more polarization. Maybe they just turned up. It's like they keep turning the notch up because it keeps taking so much more. And I heard some comment from, I don't know what podcast I was listening to, but it caught my attention of the basic thing that the person was saying was that it's just people have become numb to tragedy, basically, and because they hear so much of it. And so to fight it, people in the news just like, it's like this gradual cranking up of the volume. So really it's like the same thing year over year, but how can we make it sound more? How can we make it sound more threatening, more violent, more scary, more, it's just not a place of abundance.
Yes,
it's not a place of collaboration or creation or good news, or it's like the old thing that many people say is like, they never talk about every plane that lands, just the one that crashes, because that's the news. But they don't talk about thousands of people got to their destination safely.
Right. And the same thing, you know, the tabloids or the magazine covers or the news story covers, they're all basically, you just put different dates on it, different circumstances, different degrees perhaps.
And the tabloid stuff is so nonsensical because it's, let's talk about some famous person's life based on a tiny piece of detail we might have overheard that we might not even know anything about. And so it's just like, let's just trash somebody's name today, because what else are we going to publish?
And it may or may not even, when you get to the story, may or may not even be so much about that as it is that that's what got the click. Now, this isn't to demonize the media, because they live in this, you know, like this box of, what do we do to get more clicks, views, ratings, etc., because that's their world and that's the survival of their world. There are many people, though, back to the tabloid thing, that might not pick up a tabloid, let alone buy one, may not even look at it in the grocery store checkout line, and yet might click on some of the tabloidy type things online just because there's an intriguing title that captures their attention.
Oh, yeah, I love the look at what so-and-so looks like
now. Yeah.
Those are great, but they just lead you down the rabbit hole of like, because especially if it's a name you know, and you're like, oh, what do they look like now? What are they up to? Like, not that they care that I click, or not that they know I exist.
Yeah, 30 pages later, you still haven't found that particular answer, because that media publication and website actually earns money and gets better ranking and rating in Google the more pages you click through, which is why that's designed that way. But whatever it may be that captures our attention, whatever argument, whatever fear, whatever dispute, whatever kind of enticement, chances are it was not a part. If we're setting goals, if we're working with goals journals, for instance, or daily goals, weekly goals, whatever, quarterly goals, chances are that particular thing was not a part of it. Tuning in to negative news and arguments and, you know, indignation and righteousness and and zealousness, like this is wrong and those people are awful, this or that politician is awful, does not serve our purpose as creators, creating the life we want to live. Unless it is that your passion and mission in life is to be, you know, an activist, then perhaps that's something you need to tune into. But if not, and you're working on creating beauty and positivity and the life you want to live, then that won't get you there and that won't help.
And there's likely far more positive ways to get involved with activism than being phrasing this, there are people who are meant to be whistleblowers, there are people who are meant to report on stories, and that's fine, but there are also ways to go about activism in a way that doesn't have to mean that your life is politically charged or religiously charged or negatively charged, because that isn't necessarily what always has to move people. I think we were listening to Jay Shetty, one of his interviews, fantastic resource, we'll link him below, but he was talking about how I believe it was either Inc. or Forbes, and I'll find the article so you can see it and we'll link it below. But essentially they were saying that the top media sources and the videos that were going viral were positive stories for the first time, and I believe that was in 2018. And you don't normally see that, but because of maybe the noise that all the negativity is making. But I think just knowing that people are actually trying to tune into positivity, it means that even if you do want to get into a space of bringing awareness to a negative issue, there are probably really positive ways to do that too.
Yes, definitely. Great point. And that's a good one to link to as well. I had forgotten about the statistics that are so important. So, here's another one that we might tune into that we wouldn't think of as negative news that does derail and detract from purpose is to tune into, like you mentioned, an airplane crash. So what I started doing is asking, if you hear about an airplane crash, there's a natural inclination to think, or even an earthquake, there's a natural inclination to think, I need to know that because that's world news.
And if you don't know that, you're not
with
it.
You? You're not with it. And yet what happened to me personally is by hearing about the airplane crashes that I've heard about earlier. So like in my 30s, mid 35 around there, I started becoming afraid of flying. And I hadn't before. Is from hearing about airplane crashes. I was actually taking flying lessons in order to help face that fear. But then I also started hearing about more
plane. A friend die in
started hearing about more plane crashes, and I had a friend die in a horrible airplane crash. And so I internalized that as a sort of an empath. I have such a keen sense of living through what other people are living through, which is why in our family, for instance, my husband Coleman tends to often do the doctoring, has done the doctoring of the kids' wounds, because they come in and I literally, parts of my body start hurting. It's not so much like fear of the blood or the sight of the wound as much as the pain that actually is felt as a result from somebody else's experience. And so I lived through that. And of course I heard about that, and it was because she was also a friend. So that was unavoidable. But all the other plane crashes that then got me thinking about, well, how risky is flying? And every time I would fly, I would think about those news stories and the ones that I would have to study about in aviation in order to, one of the things you would learn is you spend most of your time in flight training, learning for emergencies, learning how to handle emergencies and what to do and how to avoid them and what can go wrong, which again, it inculcates that consciousness in your mind. It did for me because it was
preparing, but then also the paranoid side of it, of like, let's always talk about the emergency and the freak accident.
Yeah. What was comforting was that knowing that pilots go through such rigorous training in that regard, that accidents really are rare relative to how many planes are flying around the world at any given time. But let's say that, if there's an airplane crash and someone says, oh, didn't you hear about the airplane crash in the news? And you say no, and it's sort of like as if you had to have heard that. Like, who are you if you didn't know that? Or did you hear about the earthquake?
Just turn it back and be like, well, did you hear about the baby deer that survived?
Yeah. Well,
you didn't? Well, are you kidding me?
But the point is, it's sort of like back to the next point of that we'll get to in a second. But how, if it's something that you can't do anything about, if it's something we can't do anything about, that we cannot affect positively, that we cannot improve on, that we cannot change, then perhaps it isn't something that we have to know, because it's only been in the past, 50, 100 to 100 years. I mean, we've been getting world news longer than that, but the scale which we're getting world news and having all these things all around the world reported, like this or that automobile crash, or this or that murder, or this or that awful mom, or animal abuse, or what have you, or this or that politician, this or that charlatan, has been going on forever. But the extent to which it seems to be escalated, well, it's escalated because population escalates as in opportunities escalate to do good or bad. But also what's escalated is our access to news.
Oh, yeah.
So if it
feels like you're surrounded if you tune into it too long, because you're hearing about news around the world, not just local news. You're not hearing your local news or your county news or your state news, but you're hearing the national news and the global news and what's happening halfway across the world. And it's like, we've talked to Mandy Thompson about this, and it suffocates you, like emotionally and creatively, and we can't do anything about it. It's just, all you can do is receive all that information like this fire hose,
right? And
you have where do you put that? Like, where do you file that? Where do you put it? And it's not about not caring, because not tuning into the news just means you're deciding that some random person in a newsroom is not deciding what's constantly in your head and important, because they're the ones, if that's what you're tuning into, you're deciding that somebody else is in charge of what you need to know.
Yeah, totally.
And if you're deciding that somebody else is in charge of that, you're not really free to do what you need to do.
Right. Totally.
Whatever that is that you need to do.
It's derailed you. So if you consider that every distraction and diversion of your attention into something that's happening or some argument or some outrageous thing is not a part of if it's not a part of your goals list, then it doesn't belong in your day. And so obviously if it's family, friends, local community, what have you, anything that you can do something about or that affects you and your family and loved ones personally, then you must attend to it. But if not, then, and there's nothing you can do about it other than say a prayer or do a meditation or send some positivity to it, which you can do at any time. You could choose at the end of your day to say, okay, I'm going to do a quick scan, but I'm only going to tune into those things that that inspire me to think some positive thoughts about the circumstance, for instance. Otherwise, we are spending so much time, wasting so much time in turmoil and being distraught about things that, again, we feel more powerless. It makes us feel more powerless to not be able to tune into all these bad things that we cannot do anything about.
Totally. So, and events that have already passed for the most part.
Yeah.
Very rarely, well, not very rarely, but rarely is the news we hear current happening right now. I mean, now in this day and age, maybe it's a little bit more so than it's ever been before that you're hearing like live updates about XYZ, but generally even the live updates about something, it has to be like ridiculously tragic for news to just cancel its schedule and be like, we are focusing on the live updates about whatever it is. Right. But generally it's news reporting on things that have already occurred. And again, someone else is deciding that you need to know that. And they're deciding you need to put energy into this. What kind of energy? Once you know something that's already happened that you can't even change, it's not like we can go back in time and change that stuff. What kind of energy do you put into that? You know, like where does that go? And then of the bad events we hear about, who's deciding which bad events need our attention? Right. Because of the 10 bad things you might hear in a day, there's probably a dozen more lined up. And so again, it's this constant other people controlling what we need to pay attention to. And
again, things that, so we're creating our day our way, creating the life we want to live. And that includes deciding the kind of day and the attitude and thoughts we create by the things that we tune into. So are you familiar with the Hal Elrod's Cutco training? Did you want to mention that? Or shall I continue with that?
Why don't you, because you're more familiar with it.
Yeah, so, and we'll link to the article where we shared a little bit about this as well, or Hal Elrod, an incredible entrepreneur, author, survivor of multiple death and actual death experiences in which he was revived and brought back to life from this horrible automobile accident. And if that weren't enough, a few years later, he contracted an incredible, rare, and usually lethal cancer, which he also ended up surviving.
So it's safe to say he is a survivor.
He is a survivor.
Gosh darn.
And the one thing that he attributes his mindset of success in healing himself and surviving to more than anything else. And I've heard this from actually a few other people. So kudos and shout outs to Cutco knife company, for the incredible training that they offer to their salespeople. And that is, if you can't change it, so just ask yourself, if the mantra is, I can't change it, first of all, to ask yourself if you can. And if you can't change it, then be angry, rant, grieve, whatever it is, for 5 seconds.
5 minutes.
Oh, sorry, 5 minutes. You're right. 5 minutes and then move on. So you did know it. You did know it.
I knew that. I didn't know the full.
Well, I listened to my podcast on double speed.
I know. A rant for 5. I'm like, come on. No. Some drama queens need way more than 5 seconds to
5
rant.
Minutes. Thank you for that correction.
Yeah.
5 minutes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Rant and rave for 5 minutes.
But just, and you give it, and that's what he did. When he was told he would never walk again, or when he told he had cancer, it's like, oh man, I can go and curse the universe or whatever you have to do for 5 minutes, cry, scream, whatever, and then move on. And so prior to that, That's when things happen
and
to us
moving
personally.
on is like the important part, because so
exactly.
many people get stuck repeating the same 5 minutes of tragedy their whole life.
That's right. Well, I would say the tragedy wasn't 5 minutes,
right?
but
the 5 minutes
the
of
grief, yeah,
grief.
whatever.
And of course, there's layers of trauma that people experience, and you got to heal the way you got to heal. And it doesn't necessarily mean that after 5 minutes you're dandy. It's just that you're choosing, I'm going to move forward regardless.
Yeah, you have to let your thoughts move forward, or we get stuck in these vicious loops.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So that's one of the ways, and one of the mantras we use in deciding whether or not to tune into anything, and which is why I don't tune into the news. And if I see like a headline in Alexa, and usually if it's something relevant. Such as some information about, there was information about the painting that sold for like $90 million. And well, that's relevant for creatives.
Right.
Who is that? And how did that happen? And we ended up writing an article about it.
Sometimes, yeah. And it's always fun when Alexa has something good to share.
Yeah, and they do have a good news story, but even they're good. And so then if I tune into anything, then it's going to be that. But even the good news stories, to decide to do that is really to be saying, I don't know what I want to think about right now. I don't know what I have in mind to do. So I'm going to tune into this and have something else tell me what to think about for the next few minutes. So before turning on the radio or turning on the TV or scrolling social media, sort of like the way many people shop, and that is window shopping. Yeah. So window shopping is about, say, going to the mall and walking through and seeing if anything catches our eye that we might want to buy. And so really then it's like, then we didn't necessarily need something, because if we were going window shopping, then we were going to wait to be caught by something, and then to decide to buy something that we may not even really need. Well, really it's the same with thoughts. And every one of those can derail us and cause us to take on more than we need, for sure. And I think, we keep hammering that away, but it's such an important thing.
Especially with the volume of input people have access to today.
Right.
But you get to choose what you get access to.
Well, that's right. And then the other part of that is there's so much information. So like in our social groups that we mentioned and we manage, there are things that people who normally, if they were face-to-face, good neighbor, just community members, whatever, would never think to say, but there's just so much information that people are getting very sensitive and touchy and mean, basically, and angry and irritated and hurt, when things and it really doesn't happen very often in our groups at all. But on occasion it does, and it's like such a surprise, because it's just so unnecessary. But it's just the pervasive information where people are so ready to get upset. So don't be that in your life, and don't let yourself tune into those kinds of things. Because, and who are we to give you that advice? Well, it's just coming from the
people who don't tune into the news very often.
Well, no, but it's coming from the place of our like dream for you is to live the life of your dreams, and that isn't a part of it, because that won't get us there. That won't get you there. That won't get us there.
And hearing just people talking about how they don't have time for the things they really want to do, or they're frustrated or they're hurt because they hear things that they can't affect, and it's like, you can have empathy, but you can't let that stop you from doing what you need to do, because that won't. The time is going to pass. We've said it before. Time's going to pass anyway. If it's something you can't even change, then nothing's happening in the world. When you do something positive, that ripples too, even if you don't see where the ripple goes. The initial raindrop has no idea it's causing a ripple in the pond, but it just does its thing. And so when we do good and positive things and we put it out there, then we're creating ripples, and we don't always get or need to see where that goes, but I would guarantee that has more impact than being sad for prolonged amounts of time from things we can't fix.
Absolutely, that's a really great point. And similarly, when we consume inspirational, educational, informative things in areas that we're interested in, then it sends ripples of possibility and ideation and interest and sparks more desire in the direction of our dreams. And conversely, if we're tuning into the negatives, then the ripples can affect us far more than we're aware of, and then we realize. So, for instance, one of the things that like Devani knows, for me, I just don't even watch the other part about the news. Let's say that I happen to catch a side, what do you call on the side panel there of the site that I'm on, this line about mom kills her kids. And it's like, not only do I not click to that, and I even hesitate saying that here now, because just the fact of seeing that is such a horrific thing to even hear, let alone want to imagine and conceive that. And the thing is, and again, I'm sorry for saying that, I just wanted to let you know, like this, we've all seen these things. We've all heard it in the news, but we can't unhear these things. We can't unsee these things. And we definitely don't want to immerse in horror, because that is the antithesis of creativity and the positivity and beauty, which is really what we're here to create and what the world needs more of.
Yeah. I got distracted for a second because my grandmother's calling.
Oh, okay.
But yes, I didn't want to break the point.
No, okay.
But that's so true.
So just we'll get back to her in just a minute. So your bet, if it's not clear when you're deciding. So one of the things that we look at is, in fact, we just interviewed Teo Alfero, which we will link to that incredible interview with Teo Alfero of the Wolf Connection. We'll link to the interview we did with him. And he works with rescuing wolves and helping people heal through the wolf connection. And he says, basically, ask yourself on the path that you're on, like if you have a choice between paths, and in this case, a choice between what you tune into and what you don't, really that, just like our goal setting thing, can be applied for the quarterly 90-day goal setting can be applied equally to the month's goal setting, the week, and the day.
Yeah.
And that is in the life. And that is, where do I want to end up in this day? And then so back to the thing about choosing to decide on whether or not to tune into something, ask yourself, is this on purpose with my life, with my plan, my intent for the day? And is there heart here? So is there heart in this choice? So that kind of segues from not just tuning into fear and negativity and bad news, but also whether or not, in decision-making in general, is there heart here? Is there purpose for me? And if not, then move on to something that is, and your day will become more productive, more empowered, more empowering, and you will be happier.
And I think you'll start noticing the better stories that are out there, because we see good news all the time. Like you were saying, the person who has the $90 million painting that was for sale, or sculpture, whatever it was, for $90 million. Like, that's a cool story. It's like, wow, a creator made something and they were able to profit from it. And that's really cool. And you just see more stories like that. You hear more stories of people doing amazing things, and your circle expands to more creativity, more abundance. And then that's what you hear. And that's how you affect the world positively, putting positivity out there, seeing more of it, sharing more of it. That's why we love sharing interviews and podcasts that we listen to, because it's us sharing the positivity that we tune into to help you, to give you ideas, to spark ideas for you, to help with any challenges you might be going through or that you've told us about, and we're just sharing resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for tuning in. Share your thoughts. Creators at icreatedaily.com.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks so much for joining us for the I Create Daily podcast. Please let us know what creatives you would like us to interview and what topics you would be interested in hearing more about.
And if you enjoyed this show, please leave a review on iTunes. We value your feedback. We read all the reviews, and it just helps us get the word out on the I Create Daily podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.